So Tony, I understand you're heading out to the Waitekeres today.
Yeah, it's going to be a real beauty of a day, I think. We're going out into the New Zealand forest to look at a house by Pete Bossley Architects. Colin McCann was one of New Zealand's premier 20th century painters. This artist's residence is located on the site adjacent to the cottage in which McCann lived with his family and painted during a seminal period of his career in the 1950s. The new building is an artist's residence and is designed in two parts, one containing the studio and the other the house. This really is an exceptional piece of architecture.
Pete, this is a remarkable and very unusual house, but I wonder to what extent it's typical of the work of Pete Bossley Architects as a whole. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yes, we like to approach projects in similar ways to this one. It is quite typical in many ways because we like to use what is suggested by the land and by the site that we're working on to let the house bring out the poetic nature and qualities of the place in which it's located.
The success of a project depends not just on the level of technical skills that an architectural practice can bring to bear in it, but also, I think, on the personal beliefs of the architect. And maybe that was particularly the case in this project, which combined art and architecture. How did that work out for you here?
Art has always been a significant aspect of architecture for me. I draw a lot and I paint in my spare time, when I have any spare time. But I think that our approach to designing is very much to do with abstraction, of taking a strong idea, distilling all the complexity of architecture into that strong idea, and then letting the idea drive the design through to the end.
New Zealand's a really special place. I wonder what it is about New Zealand that makes the practice of architecture here for you what it is and enables you to produce buildings like this one.
I think New Zealand is a great country to be an architect, partly because it's such an egalitarian society, and the clients really enjoy the relaxed nature of our architecture, but also because the landscape here is just so stunning, and it varies so much from top to bottom of the country that we get to design totally different buildings in response to the landscape. Whether we're working in the Bay of Islands or down in the Southern Alps and the South Island, it is just such a fantastic joy to be able to do buildings that vary according to the landscape that they're sitting in, and it is a wonderful place to be an architect.
Pete Bossley Architects is an architectural and interior design practice which has the express purpose of providing intense input into a deliberately limited number of projects. The practice is based on the belief that innovative yet practical design is essential for the production of good buildings, and that the best buildings spring from an open and enthusiastic collaboration between architect, client, and consultants.
Pete, this is an extremely unusual house, it seems to me. It's unusual because of the site, which is so tightly constrained by the trees and the bush, but also unusual in how it arose that your client was in fact a trust and not an individual. Would you like to tell us about how the job started out for you?
Yeah, it was really interesting project because the subject, Colin McCann, the history is fantastic, and he has a really huge importance in the history of New Zealand art, and he lived in the cottage right next to where we were working. And so it was incredibly important to respect that and to design a building which A, respected his and his family's environment, and also respected the trees that are here, which are all very important native kauri trees. Very difficult site, falls away very steeply, and so the house is sort of woven in amongst the trees, incredibly difficult to build. We were working with a trust who was set up specifically to run the artist's residency here, and so they were very interested in doing a work that had international significance. So it had a whole wealth of interesting ideas and issues to deal with, which normal houses, for example, don't have to deal with. So it was fascinating. It was wonderful to work on it.
The house is fascinating in itself. Some of McCann's work was, of course, done here on this site, and there's a series which deals with the kauri that we see around us, these enormous trees. Is there any way that one could think that the house itself is a kind of artwork as well as a work of architecture in your mind?
Yeah, the initial concept of the house was to see it as a series of planes placed amongst the trees, rather like abstract paintings in a way. Some of them are done in rusted steel, which is changing slowly over the years. Some of them are done in steel mesh, some of them are bright colours. And they float amongst the trees conceptually, and then the spaces of the house lie between those vertical planes.
Okay, that's the big picture. Let's go and check it out, shall we?
Yeah, sure.
Andrea, seeing the house from the outside, kind of nestling amongst the trees, it's really very unusual in its appearance. And when you come inside, it's equally unusual. You know, really a strong palette of colours, very unusual windows. You were involved in the design of the house. Can you tell us how you worked out what the interior was going to be like?
Well, the interior really came about from the exterior. The unusual sort of shapes of the spaces are due to the fact that we had to squeeze the house in between the trees. You can see this main beam here punching through the glass, which involved a lot of tricky detailing to make it waterproof. And also the colours that we've used in the interior, the reds and the yellows to sort of punctuate the dense green of the bush. And then you can see how we've used light to bring a little bit of the outside inside, because obviously in winter in Titirangi it's dark and it's rainy and misty.
One of the things that really strikes me is how this house, the artist's house, stands in such a powerful contrast to the old McCann cottage down the hill.
That's right, we wanted to both respect the existing McCann house, but at the same time this building needed to have its own voice and be able to stand strongly on the site itself.
And the artists who are in residence here, I bet they enjoy it.
Yeah, I think they do. I think it's quite unusual for them to be, I guess, in a tree house working for a lot of them. A lot of them have come from Europe, where they're usually from big cities, so I think that's quite an unusual thing, and it's a uniquely New Zealand thing as well, which I think is really, really important.